Good afternoon from Chicago, Illinois. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm the co-founder of Actionable Innovations Global. And I'm excited to welcome you to this next session. It is my pleasure, and I have it in another window. Good. I did this at the last one. Sorry about that. So I'm Lucy Gray, and it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Carolyn Foote. She is my longtime friend through EdTech, and she is a rewired school librarian and a powerful advocate for intellectual freedom and student voice. She is the co-founder of the grassroots organization Texas Freedom Fighters, a group that has been working tirelessly to defend students' rights to read and learn freely in Texas and across the United States. Her leadership in this space has been widely recognized. Carolyn was honored as a White House Champion of Change, and received the American Library Association's Robert B. Downs Intellectual Freedom Award. She has also been recognized by People magazine as a woman changing the world. Many of you also know her from the documentary The Librarians, which highlights the critical work of librarians are doing to defend access information and uphold democratic values. Carolyn is deeply passionate about student voice, vibrant library spaces, and the thoughtful use of technology to support learning and access. Today, she'll be sharing insights from the front lines for the fight for intellectual freedom and the vital role librarians play in protecting freedom to read. Please join me in welcoming Carolyn Foote. We're so honored to have you here and so excited to hear from you. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. And libraries are really at the center of our democracy, so it seems fitting that I get to join you. So my name is Carolyn Foote, and Lucy gave a little background on who I am. I was a school librarian for 29 years and a library director. I taught English for 10 years prior to that. And I also was deeply invested in sort of the rollout of technology into libraries pretty early on. But I came to this work unexpectedly after retiring Rewiring, when we started to see censorship threats in Texas. And I, along with some colleagues, accidentally co-founded a group called the Freedom Fighters, which is why I'm here. Our URL's on the screen, and just a little bit about what happened. So this is an example of how ordinary people speaking up can make a difference. And much to our surprise, our ability to speak up has led to so many other opportunities to have our voices heard and the voices of librarians heard. When the governor in Texas and a state representative started talking about libraries having pornography and books needing to be removed, we felt like they were really misrepresenting the story of what libraries offer to our students and to the community. This was 5 years ago now. And a group of us decided to do a simple reaction and do a Twitter hashtag takeover of the Texas Ledge hashtag to get attention. And we plotted it in secret, notified our author friends, library friends, just people we knew online, to participate and share diverse books that mattered to them in their lives. And the day of the event, November 4th, 5 years ago, we had over 13,000 tweets go out. And we were shocked by the volume and the response, and realized people were really hungry to learn more, to learn how to support their libraries and to support diverse books in their libraries. And so when I say we accidentally co-founded something, the Texas Freedom Fighters, it was at that moment we decided people needed resources. So we created a website and a Twitter account, and we had no idea 5 years later we would still be in this struggle over whose voices matter in our libraries and in our educational communities. And out of that work came an opportunity. We had a couple of colleagues and I were found by CNN through this Twitter hashtag takeover, and they did a short piece on us. And a film director, Kim A. Snyder, um, saw it, contacted us, and wanted to do some sort of a documentary around what was going on with our work and book banning in Texas. And for those of you who've seen the Librarians, you know that the story evolved way beyond the work freedom fighters was doing and included censorship happening around Texas, in Florida, in New Jersey. I think one of our film participants might be here. But and the documentary was filmed over 4 years and sort of spans that story. It is streaming live on PBS right now for another month and a half. And so if you haven't seen it, it's also premiering in theaters still around the country and at film festivals. So if you haven't seen it, it really tells the story in a very powerful, powerful way. I think it's important, as my friend Barbara Bray, who is a star in the EdTech world, always talks about, that we know our why, that we know our purpose and what's driving our work. And for me, this quote by a parent in Virginia who spoke at a school board meeting kind of early on really reflects why I and my colleagues are in this. And that is that we do not want our students to feel like some of their stories are not valued or do not exist, that they don't have perspectives that are important in our culture or in a culture anywhere in any country. And we're all members of a community, and part of being a community is that not only do you speak, but you also listen, and you listen to the voices of others. And so that is really why I was in it. And as a retired educator, I didn't have to worry about what my district would say if I spoke up. I didn't have to worry, about restrictions. But I've also been mindful that the work we do is representing educators, and it's so important to have professional voices out there speaking on behalf of educators, students, and libraries. And I want to remind everyone, although this isn't just about libraries right now, because academic freedom is being challenged, but libraries, the existence of libraries and librarians is our secret superpower as a culture, and for any culture, for literacy, for connections in the community, and for gaining access to information. Because although we have the internet, yes, in our pockets, not everything is online for free. Not everyone is able to gain the skills to read, to vote. And some questions are deeper and more difficult than others and need the assistance of librarians. But librarians also provide all sorts of community services, connections. There are seed libraries, tool libraries, 3D printers in libraries, STEM activities in libraries. So there's all sorts of ways that libraries are building connections in their communities. But what's happened the last few years is told in the story of headlines that you've probably all seen around the country. Legal challenges, public libraries being challenged, school libraries being challenged, books that we all have heard of, like Toni Morrison's Beloved or The Color Purple by Alice Walker, being removed. Books with LGBTQ characters, picture books that we know and love. A book about Billie Jean King has been removed in a Texas school district. So all sorts of stories being silenced, and the headlines have told that story. Early on, we said that school libraries were really the canary in the coal mine, that it was starting with us, but it would not stop with us. And we've seen in the last years academic censorship in the universities has expanded far beyond what any of us could ever expect, with the chilling effect happening at the university level, diversity programs being removed and canceled, programs for women being removed and canceled. So this movement has grown and evolved, and that's why in the title of this, I said we are all freedom fighters, because all of our voices matter in defining the kind of world that we want to see in the future. We've also seen attacks on specific book titles grow tremendously. You can see this chart, and just for perspective, prior to 2021, the average number of book challenges per year was between 200 and 300 nationwide. And now in the last year, we're seeing over 10,000 book challenges, individual book titles. So we're not in the same ballpark at all in what's happening. And what happens when this becomes more commonplace is people who hadn't really tuned in think this is the way it always was. I was a librarian for 29 years, for example, and I only had 3 book challenges in that whole 29 years. So it's not a common occurrence traditionally in the library space, or in the classroom for that matter. And so we're definitely in a different era. And I see Barbara in the chat, and I just mentioned you a few minutes ago, Barbara. So the other thing we know is that in another unusual statistic, normally if there's a book challenge in my career, a parent would have a concern about a title and bring it to our attention in the library, or bring it to the school's attention. Right now, 90% of book challenges are coming in the form of lists, like, I want these 100 books removed. I want these 50 books removed. I want this 1,000 books removed. And so it's not the typical a parent saw their child was reading a book and brought in a concern. And Pen America found, in looking at their data, that 75% of these were basically organized efforts, a Facebook group, a political organization, politically motivated book challenges. So again, this speaks to the moment we're in and sort of the heated environment that we're all operating in right now. Penn also found, as you might be aware, that the titles that are banned tend to be books about race and racism, or characters of color. In Texas, this all started with the sort of anti-critical race theory movement. And then also a significant number of titles, and growing, are removed because they might have LGBT characters in them, or themes, or information. And they've also documented that we've had increasing challenges to books about violence and abuse, and reminding you that these books are books where a character might experience abuse and then gets help, and other characters come in to help them, or they're informational books about what to do if you're in this circumstance. Topics of health and well-being, books about suicide. The critics say they're glorifying suicide, which isn't the case at all. These are books where a character is, maybe a friend is suicidal and they're trying to help them. Books about death and grief. Books that just have more serious themes in general. So it's created this situation for librarians, and also for educators and college educators, of what Amanda Ripley calls high conflict, where it's turned this in sort of a good versus evil battle, so to speak, where we're pitted against each other, and where you're either on the right side of this or the wrong side of this. And so it's important that we understand why libraries matter, why books matter to our democracy, and why the ability to have conversations about ideas you don't agree with are so important. So it's always good to take a deep breath because it's stressful to think about all of the assaults on our democratic values and our educational values. And so it's always good to take a moment. And young adult author Jason Reynolds reminds us that if we wall off certain narratives, then we're blocking out part of the world we actually live in, because our world is truly global because of the internet specifically, that no one is in a vacuum. People work remotely with people from all over the world and all over the country. And we are shutting out some voices that are parts of our world. So this conference centers around democracy, and I want to talk a little bit about how books and libraries contribute to our democracy. Libraries really reflect our values. If you know the history of libraries in America, for example, Benjamin Franklin started the first library, and it's still there today. And so our founding fathers believed in libraries. Our Library of Congress, the amazing Library of Congress, the collection was donated by Thomas Jefferson to build the library after a fire had decimated some of their collection. So our founding fathers felt that an informed public was central to our democracy. And that is what libraries are all about, whether you're reading books online, an ebook, you're visiting the library in person. Our libraries collect our history, our stories. They're about access. They're about our First Amendment rights. They're about the rights of political expression on all sides of the aisle. They're about freedom of the press and journalism, and they're about freedom of religion. They reflect all of our values because librarians are trained to curate materials with a variety of points of view, appeal to a variety of maturity levels, and people can voluntarily come in and learn about what's important to them. I heard part of the Rebuilding Belonging talk this morning by Julian Abel and Marianne Bowe, and they were talking about the importance of bringing people together. And Julian spoke about sort of a treasure map of connections between people. And Mary talked about a way to celebrate the gifts that people have and think of what happens in a public library or a school library where you have the whole community coming together, where there's programming that celebrates different people's talents, whether it's knitting or robotics or poetry. It's a place that brings people in community together. And it's so important that we are in community together, whatever our viewpoints are, so that we build those bridges and we help build understanding. And libraries are really a nexus for that because of their programming and sort of the intentionality about having a diverse set of viewpoints. Books also reflect our democracy. They support our democracy by helping us be informed and well educated. They sustain us in times of trouble. They give us light posts and guideposts, but they also push at our democracy and ask questions about what's been fair or just in our history and what our democracy could live up to and what it can be, errors we've made in the past, where we want to go in the future. So books are foundational to a democratic value. And this is why in autocratic countries, you see limits placed on libraries closed, censorship of books, and why in flourishing democracies, you see libraries as really central and celebrated. In the book, How Books Can Save Democracy, by Michael Fisher, it's a little tiny book, he talks about a vibrant democracy doesn't eliminate disagreement, but it makes disagreement more constructive. It helps us find ways to talk to each other. And he talks in this book about the importance of books helping us dialogue and see other points of view. Books, he claims, help us understand things and be more open to other ideas, because when we're invested in a character in a novel who's really different from us, sometimes the light bulb goes on and we realize, oh, what that character is experiencing. We feel more empathy. We see other points of view about topics we're reading about, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction. We used to carry this set of books in our library called Opposing Viewpoints, and there were titles about opposing viewpoints about everything under the sun, but it was essays with pros and cons about different topics. So it helps us explore what other people think. I briefly coached debate when I was teaching, and one of the things you have to do when you coach debate is prepare students to argue either side of an issue. So they have to be well informed on both sides of the issue. And I think that's something we're lacking sometimes. Books help us not oversimplify the world, because they have the long form, so they can develop complexity more than a soundbite on X or Blue Sky or Facebook. And we need that right now, the slow sort of learning that books can bring. And they're also sort of the empathy that's built through reading, he says, is gradual and cumulative. It's not like you read one book and it's quick fix, but over time as you read, you develop more empathy for other ideas, you develop habits of mind, and that is why books are such an important part of our democracy. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talked about books as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and you might have heard that before, but this idea that books reflect us so we don't feel alone. We feel like there are other people and other weirdos in the world like us, but they're also windows to worlds we don't know about, experiences we aren't aware of. And they're also sliding glass doors to really like science fiction, the world of fantasy, things we hadn't imagined, the future, 2050, 2080. What is the future going to be like? So it really invites us into our imagination. And libraries also allow for equity of access. And I'd like to spend a minute on this because globally, we're seeing libraries close due to funding cuts. We're seeing it here in the US, we're seeing it in Canada, we're seeing it in Great Britain. And so it's really important to understand this because although people like to say, well, you can just buy a book, this ignores the fact that there are many households who cannot just buy a book. And they don't necessarily, young people don't necessarily have transportation to a public library. And sadly, in some states like California, parts of California, for example, but other states as well, school librarians have been cut or schools don't even have a library. And so the place where most young readers get their books is the school library. And if you don't have access to that, you are disadvantaged because you are competing with students going to college who had a vibrant library full of books and with a librarian and training you on research and who the great authors are and who are the popular authors. And you're missing all of that. So that equity is so important. I see a question about bookmobiles. There are still bookmobiles actually in some places, and that's an important way to also provide access for people. I know as a kid, the bookmobile stopped at the end of my street. And so I was a frequent bookmobile user before they built a public library near my house. So where are readers lurking in our world right now? Well, 155 million Americans, according to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, are public library users. So this doesn't count the number of students. When you think of the number of students in this country who have school libraries, which is still a majority, that doesn't count that number of Americans. So it's a huge number of people in this country are library patrons and library users. And these are some of the types of places where they might be lurking in libraries around the country that are inviting and beautiful spaces in their schools or in their communities. But there are also beautiful libraries that are well used, like the British libraries. And this is a library in Suwon in North and South Korea, pardon me, in South Korea. It's a 4-story library in a mall, and you can see how beautiful it is and how populated it is. South Korea is a burgeoning democracy that's just blown up since the 80s when it became a true democracy, and libraries are a very important part of culture there. We also know that book clubs are growing. Over 5% of adults now belong in some sort of book club. Over 13 million Americans are part of some sort of book club. And there's all sorts of book clubs. Some of you may be in a book club. Some of you may be multiple book clubs, online ones, in-person ones, but books helping us connect with other people and other stories. And online, we see readers. Goodreads says it has over 150 million users who are talking about books. Book Talk on TikTok has over 370 billion views of that hashtag. So don't let people tell you that people aren't reading or aren't talking about books, because they are, and they're everywhere. And book clubs and book discussion groups are happening, and it's a great way for people to, again, broaden their understanding of democracy, broadening their understanding of other people, making connections, whether they're meeting in a library or a bookstore or a coffee shop. They're building bridges, they're building connections with other people. But reading is also nourishment when we're alone. It can help us find comfort when we're not with other people. It can help us process our feelings. So it helps us grow individually as well as culturally together. So knowing all of this, why are people trying to ban books? I asked AI just to see what it would tell me, but having worked in this area for a while, I know the reasons, but people have religious reasons that they come after books traditionally. They have concerns about the level of content, sexual content they want their child to read. Political agendas, which is what we're experiencing now, fear that if people read about a controversial idea, they will adopt it. And you always have to challenge that one. Just because someone reads The Great Gatsby does not mean they become a billionaire and move into a mansion and have parties. Just because someone reads Grapes of Wrath does not mean they pack up their truck and drive across country to California. So ideas in books do not necessarily cause people to do something. And some people say they're trying to remove books to protect children or youth. And most often they say children, but a lot of times what they mean is teenagers, and they kind of conflate the two. And I want to argue that teens and little children are quite different in what they need in their reading. Right now, we're in a moment, though, where political agendas have really entered the equation. Some of it started really when in the Virginia governor's race 5 years ago, when Youngkin was a candidate, And a parent brought up a concern with the book Beloved and her son being traumatized by reading it in high school. And the Democratic candidate did not answer the question well about her rights as a parent. And it became this book became the center of this whole parental rights movement that you've heard about. I want to say, as far as libraries concerned, parents have always had rights. Your parent has to help you sign up for a library card. In the last 20 years, that's been true because you have to show proof of address, etc. But also librarians, school public librarians, if a parent comes in and says, I don't want my child to check out. For me, it was a parent didn't want their child to read Garfield books because they felt like they were reading too many. So you can put a note in their digital record so it pops up and says, oh, sorry, your parent doesn't want you to check that out. That already existed. But this whole concept of parental rights, which sort of implies that students and teenagers have no intellectual rights, which I think they do, has entered the room. And so you've seen legislation passed in many states relating to parental rights, and you've seen that enter the agenda, and that leads to the discussions being highly charged. So a parent might not come in and politely tell the librarian that they have a single book they're concerned about. Instead, they're going to show up at a school board meeting with other people in tow and scream and read things out of books. Or they're going to start a pressure campaign to get a book removed because it's become like a political football now. One of the other things, Dr. Emily Knox has written a great deal about censorship and done a lot of scholarship about it. And she talks about this notion of monosemic interpretation versus polysemic. And that is that book challengers think there's only one way to interpret what they see on the page. So especially as it relates to more mature content or content relating to sexual education or the mention of sex in a book, that if they see something on a page, that is the way it is. And they don't feel like a book has multiple interpretations, or because a word appears on one page out of 200 pages, that makes the whole book somehow suspect. So this is a concern that we've definitely been seeing. A tool that's been well used by people attempting to use political agendas to ban books is, and Brene Brown talks about this a lot, is the role of shame. When we are shamed, when a school administrator is shamed, when a political operative is shamed, a library director is shamed, what happens when we go into shame? We go into fear. We go into our childhood triggers. We want to seek safety. We isolate ourselves. We try to blame someone else. So all of those are things that happen when we get into shame. And so part of what we need to do to deal with this moment where diversity, equity, and inclusion are being used as weapons against us as professional librarians, educators, professors, is that we need to be prepared for this and know our own habits around shame. We need to understand where we go. And then instead of going into our childhood stuff, we need to stay in our professional best practices. We need to use our policies. We need to consult with other professionals. We need to be prepared that this could happen to us because it can happen to anyone. And we need to avoid falling into shame, but we also need to educate those around us. So if you're in a position where you work with administrative level staff or curriculum staff, they need to understand this whole piece around shame, because if you understand it's being used as a weapon against you, then you don't fall prey to that weapon. And you're less likely to respond out of a reactive place and more effective in how you deal with this. But what we're seeing in general, this is just an example from one Texas legislative session. There were 30 bills relating to libraries and librarians and children and library organizations. There was a bill asking vendors to rate books. There was a bill that passed, both of these passed, to set up a library advisory committee of parents that would approve books. There were bills to strip away protections for all professionals who might be giving students material that could be construed as harmful, including things like, a book with the facts about your body, which a counselor might give to students in the course of their work. Right now, the picture is that there's 42 bills of concern right now. They're not just 42 bills. These are the 42 bills we're most concerned about in 19 different states. And there was recently a federal bill filed, HR 7661. You may see library advocates posting about this. It's important to contact your congressperson about it. The bill is terrible. It's very unlikely to go anywhere. It's poorly written, but it targets people who are different. It targets mature themes. It targets trans people and LGBTQ people. And again, it says that their stories don't belong. So it's important that we know that we're still in this. And it's almost harder now because before we were engaged in like local communities having these conversations, local school board elections, local library boards, local universities. And now we're in a situation where state legislators are passing laws. And so these laws are regulating everyone. So your community may be very progressive, but if you're in a state that has one of these laws, you're being held to that law. So it's important to know that. Every library, the organization, every library has a legislative tracker. And I'll talk in a minute about some of the other ways you can stay informed. So how can we be prepared? Educating ourselves. What is censorship? Emily Knox talks about this. It's not just removing a book, it's restricting it to an adults only shelf. It's relocating it to a LGBTQ section of the library. It's redacting, like drawing shorts on a character, a little boy on the cover of a book, which has happened. It's marking out words in a book. You can report censorship that you are aware of to the ALA's challenge reporting to their Office of Intellectual Freedom. And we can't count if it's not reported because many cases we hear about, but there's also a lot of self-censorship going on and people are afraid, so they're removing stuff ahead of like an official challenge. So if you hear of stories like that, you can report it. You can join Unite Against Book Bans, which is ALA's arm. It's a national initiative to help people stand up against censorship. And what they don't email you hardly ever, but if there's something going on in your local community, they know your zip code, they can email you. We need people to show up for this, against this bill or for this library near us. Every library, as I mentioned, is an organization that is both a 501c3 and a nonprofit, and they work in spaces with state legislative efforts. And so they are trying to help pass freedom to read legislation specifically and very savvy about that. And PEN America represents authors, and the Freedom to Read has been doing that for over 100 years. It's a great organization to belong to, and they post things all the time about what's happening. And these are other advocates that you might want to know. Authors Against Book Bans and Publishers Against Book Bans have formed in the last year and a half. And so they're using their resources to push back. The Freedom to Read Project was started by Florida Freedom to Read. And now it's a national project to help educate people. And we are Texas Freedom to Read Project. I mean, we are Texas Freedom Fighters, but there is a parent group called Texas Freedom to Read. There's also lawsuits being filed. We're winning some, we're not winning others. So the courts aren't always the answer, but that's also happening in this moment. So you can ask AI if you get in a situation, what messages are effective about book banning? But I think what's most effective is what I've already talked about, how books help us build bridges, how books help us make connections with other people, how we're preserving our rights as democratic citizens. We are preserving our freedom of information, our freedom of access. They foster critical thinking. It's important that we know how to talk about this. And the Unite Against Book Bans that I just mentioned, their website has a whole toolkit with talking points if you want to know more about how to effectively talk about this. The other part of this that's tricky is sex education, and talking about it helps people protect themselves as teens if they have the proper information. So that can't be left out of the equation either when we think about the kinds of books that are being removed. And I also want to mention that educators are facing external pressures, but they're also facing internal pressures. There are all sorts of pressures to silently remove books, or pressures we place on ourselves to go, should I teach this book or not? And so we have to remember that we're encountering both of those. But again, I encourage people to rely on academic rigor. Professionals should not comply in advance. We should do our homework. We should learn more. We should rely on our policies. We should apply academic rigor when we examine works and age relevance of those works. We should seek support from other people that we know that are in the field. We should show respect for professionals. If you're a curriculum director, you should respect the expertise of your library director and vice versa. And you have to maintain an awareness of local politics, because if this is going on in the neighborhood near you, it's very easy through social media for it to jump to your neighborhood. You also need to remember there are partners in this. There are people in your community that care about libraries, that care about education, that care about their universities, and they want to help. There's also a National Right to Read working group of organizations from all over the country, publishers, authors, folks like me, grassroots folks, that are coming together so we have a unified voice on this issue. And we have a monthly town hall that you're welcome to join. If you're interested, just contact me and I'll connect you. But just to assure people, we are working together on this. We also need to remember that it's important to show up for our values. This fight, this struggle for our democracy can't happen if we don't show up for what we value. That means authors, booksellers, teachers, administrators, grandparents. We all have to find ways to show up, and not everybody's going to go testify at a hearing like this group here, which was an author, teachers, librarians, bookstores folks. But it does mean you might write an email, you might write a letter, you might send a postcard to your librarian saying, if you ever have trouble, I'm here for you, here's my email. Just ways you can show people that you're there to help. But it is time for us to take control of the narrative. We shouldn't just be living in fear and talking about that. We need to tell the stories about how education and libraries build community. They strengthen our communities. They build senses of belonging. They make us informed citizens in our democracy. And we need to start really telling that story, leaning into that story, the power of books, the power of education, so that we're not always on the defensive, but we're leaning into the positive stories that our communities really, when you poll people, they love their public school. They love their public library. So we need to lean in on that as well as much as we can and celebrate the our libraries. And that can even be posting a picture of your library visit on Facebook, or a great book you checked out, or your teacher's something great your teacher did. But on the positive side, I want to mention one of the things that's happened is way more people are talking about books and what libraries mean to them and what college means to them and universities mean to them. Way more people are reading powerful book titles because, as someone told me, they only go after the best books, right? So they're only trying to ban the books that are really good. And so consequently, teens definitely want to read a banned book, right? So they're going to try to gain access. School board elections. Over the last 4 cycles, a lot of the extremists have been voted off school boards because people just want their school boards to work for their community. They don't want a lot of fighting on their school board. Local decision making has gotten stronger. Some states have passed freedom to read legislation, like Illinois was a real leader in that. And independent bookstores and publishers like Penguin Random House Macmillan have really stepped up and are helping support educators and libraries. So we need to have hope, and it is important to remember the great things that education brings to our communities, that young adult novels bring access. And I want to show how far libraries have come, from Benjamin Franklin's Library Company of Philadelphia to Black individuals in Virginia doing a sit-in to gain access to their public library in 1939, to the Carnegie libraries that billionaire Andrew Carnegie seeded all over the country, to being able to have books about LGBTQ individuals in our libraries, to the first Black Librarian of Congress. We've made progress in the library world, and we need to keep making that progress because our society is making progress. So think about what makes your institution sing. People want faith in our stories. And how can you help tell those stories? People want faith in our democracy. So how can we sing about all the things that are working, all the ways we do work in community together in our country? And so my title was, We're All Freedom Fighters. And I love this quote because if you're fighting censorship in any shape or form, you are a freedom fighter. I have a few books on the slides that are books, young adult books about censorship, and some adult books you might want to read to get more informed yourself. And lastly, just a reminder to see the Librarians film if you haven't already, streaming on PBS. And I have about 2 minutes if anybody has a question.
So let's see if we have any questions that have come up. Let's see. Super Tim, do you have any ones that you've bookmarked that you think are particularly good ones that you want to put on the screen? He was looking at the comments, I think. So here's a question while we're looking to see if there are any questions here. I'm wondering here's a really good, here's one that you addressed a little bit, but maybe you want to go over it again. Martha Anderson asked, how can you find out what's happening in individual states? Do you want to review that one more time?
Sure. So an organization called Every Library has a legislative tracker. Also, if you're looking for your particular state, most state library associations, every state has a, public or school library association. They mostly have a legislative tracker somewhere on their website when the legislature's in session. They usually have emails you can sign up for in your state to be informed if something's happening. And then again, you can join Unite Against Book Bans. Anyone can join it, and they'll inform you if something is going on in your state or locally that you need to be paying attention to. The Office of Intellectual Freedom also has an email, weekly or monthly email of censorship going on all over the country. It's kind of overwhelming. It's so many articles. So unless you're deeply into this, I wouldn't recommend that. But but those are some different ways you can find out.
In terms of what you're hearing from other countries, you mentioned that book bans are happening in other countries as well. What's your I don't know, what are you observing internationally that we should be aware of too? Because we have a lot of international participants in the conference. Is there particular areas or organizations that work internationally?
There are library associations in different countries. So I know in Canada, parts of Canada, we are exporting some of our worst ideas as well as some of our good ideas. And unfortunately, it's affecting Canada. We've seen some of this encroach into the UK. Both countries have strong library associations that are tracking this, as well as PEN America. Even though it's PEN America, they do track of impacts on world authors as well. And PEN America also tracks like silencing of authors worldwide, silencing of dissidents. So, but I've seen, this is like an avalanche. There's a video game. I always forget the name. My son makes fun of me because I never remember the name, but it's these people that roll down a hill and they get tangled in a ball and they all stick together like an avalanche ball until like all these people's legs are sticking out and stuff. And
I have no idea.
yes, but anyway, it's like that now. So things are just getting swept up. So people think this is the norm. So then you hear people go, well, should we have any books about Palestine in a library? Like, should we have any books about Iran in a library? So it just becomes this moment where people think any idea they don't like shouldn't be in a library. And so, or in an academic setting like the university, we've seen that happen in universities with Palestine. So it's definitely just a critical moment that we keep reminding people how important the diversity of ideas is to the very survival of our democracy.
I think that education piece is really important, the adult education piece. We can do it in schools, obviously, because we have a captive audience in schools, but the public, how do you educate the public, I think is one of my concerns. And one of the reasons I'm hoping to have the Librarians screened at the library in my town where I work part-time is for that reason. I think it's important for people to be aware of it. And so we're hoping to do it during Banned Book Week. We'll see if that happens.
Amazing.
But I think it's really important that we do. I think we can do it in an impartial way. Say this is why. Remind people. I think it's also about reminding people of the foundations of democracy and what happens. And I think people have lost sight of that. Barbara Bray has a question for you.
Sure. So it is streaming on the Librarians film is streaming on PBS Independent Lens on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half. It's very intense. So watch all the way through, project it to your TV if you can. It is showing at some film festivals still. And if you go to the librariansfilm.com, they do have a calendar of where it's showing in theaters if people want to see it in a theater setting. It will only be on PBS for another, I think, month and a half. So it's not indefinitely.
I've watched it twice, actually. I saw it at the Illinois Library Association conference, and then and I think some of the people from the film were actually there talking about it in a panel afterwards. And then I saw it. I listened to it online, almost like a podcast, just to kind of refresh my memory of it. And what struck me too, and Amanda, who's featured in the film, friended me on Facebook, and her story really impacted me in terms of standing up in a community that's not necessarily receptive to your ideas. I mean, people are brave, and I was really struck by things that we've just taken for granted in some parts of the country, how inflamed it is in other parts, and those people who are standing on the front lines are really super brave.
Yes, and they're super tired, so we need advocate we get. And I also wanted to mention on the PBS Librarians film website on Independent Lens. At the bottom of the page, they have a whole discussion guide for if you want to bring the film in and discuss it with people. So, and the films page also has a discussion guide. So if you want to have conversations with people or have a living room showing with people, I think just finding ways to bring it to community is so important.
So I think, one of the things that we're trying to do at the conference is have everybody take one thing and put it into action. And so this might be an easy thing for people to do, to have like a living room, have a potluck and have people come over and watch it in your home, in the comfort of your own home with your friends. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big extravaganza, but it's those small movements, those small actions that lead up to something more significant. And I think also post-pandemic, this coming together again of people is really important. We've heard that often. Another theme that you mentioned too are values, or and reinvestigating our own values and what we stand for. I think that's a theme that I've heard at the conference, starting with Howard Gardner yesterday. So this has been the perfect presentation, Carolyn. I'm so grateful to have you here and to give us the background, the detailed background, the research that goes into some of these ideas. I think is really important. And I will be sharing this with lots of people so that your message gets out. You've been tireless in your work, going around the country and talking about all this, and we're grateful for your work.
Thank you. And I see people in the chat saying they're going to promote this and promote the film, and I'm so appreciative. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Lucy, so much for putting on this conference. Thrive is amazing, and for having me join you. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate your time. We're going to do this again in the fall. So just to kind of give everybody a heads up, and we're not over yet. We're going till 4:00 Central today. There are lots of great sessions coming up. Next hour there's like 4, I think. At 2:00 Central, there's a panel from Minneapolis of activists. Our closing keynote features people in Dilley, Texas, or in San Antonio who are involved with the Dilley, Texas detention center. So I hope everybody will stick around and for those. And I appreciate everyone's time, and we'll see you at the next set of sessions. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And we're off.